Thank you so much. Thank you to our audience for staying with us, and thank you so much to artist Shahzia Sikander for joining us. I'm going to hand it now over to Manuela Ceballos again to moderate the conversation, the Q&A.
Hello, I don't think I can turn on my own video. Here we go. Thank you so much for that, Shahzia. I was just thinking of how absolutely overwhelmed I was while talking to you, and grateful to you for showing that amount of work and sharing with us your life and trajectory. So we've got a lot of questions for you from the audience. Some of them are in the Q&A. If you want to go through those and make a selection. And we can start there. I also have compiled a series of others that people have been asking.
I think it will be best if you select.
If I ask you the questions?
Yeah, and let me know.
Sure. So some of the first questions that I had, or that I've noted, had to do with the symbolism of the house and the scroll. And people were also interested in the symbolic aspect of the miniature. If you could speak to that, animals and the house and the architecture, if there was some additional meaning that was not accessible to us that you could elaborate on.
Yes, so for me at that time, the house is really a space that is around me. So I'm like engaging with the space, which is my parents' house too. But it's also the idea of it could be any particular house. Because I was looking at Behzad's and Safavid use of space and the stacked up perspective, the use of the interior exterior dynamic, the very opened up kind of idea of images can simultaneous narratives can happen, action is taking place in multiple rooms. So I was really thinking about how to use that, be inspired by that language, but also engage with the local vernacular, which is a local, the eminent Nayar Ali Da, the architect. So it's his language too. So I was kind of, playing with that dynamic of a language of an architect, the actual being in live space, taking sketching from space and moving in space. Plus also, I think this is important to know, is that this is during the Zia's military dictatorship. At that time, there's already changes happening in terms of physical mobility and being in and out of public and private spaces. So as a young female, it was a little bit changed. Like it wasn't, you couldn't just be hanging outside, though of course one had a lot of freedom. I was going to the art school and I was working there into late hours also, but there's already this restriction happening on the mobility of the feminine form. And that's why I thought, if it would make sense to situate the protagonist in the interiority of a domestic space, and then use that as an idea to question domestic dimension of not just how gender plays a role, but how class plays a role. So those are things. But it's, for me, it's also the scroll format is such that it is a day in a life. It could be a lifetime. It is a time. It's the idea of a continuous time. Doesn't have a border on the left and the right. It's also for me, it was cinematic. So I was also looking not just at the Safavid painting, but I was also looking at film and how film works in terms of its armature, of visual armature, of giving a sense of narrative. And I was also interested in that. I think there are many other influences that are playing the role in the actual structuring of that work.
Wonderful. Yeah, there were there was so much engagement as the video was playing that it's hard to keep track. So I want to make sure that we get to the symbolism because there's more questions on what things mean, but also on the technique, because we've got people from the art school here who are really interested in also the process, the actual process of doing this. So we have a question that involves colors. Did your studies in Lahore involve unique perspectives on color that you can share with us? Are there any pigment colors used centuries ago in the miniature paintings that are revived today, or of interest to you and other contemporary artists? And so there's that question about color, and also questions about tradition versus innovation, also coming from the art school too. Your work is clearly informed by your formative education in the tradition of miniature painting. At the same time, you've also studied art for your MFA at RISD, but were clearly evolving in your practice prior to this. So can you talk a little bit more about learning a traditional discipline as a formative experience to prepare you to extend this history and tradition? So I think there's those questions about tradition also extend to technique. There were we have a miniature artist too in the audience that expressed a particular connection to your work too and wanted advice. And I'll bring up her question, but if you could start with some of that, that would be great.
Yes. So you know, the idea of tradition, like I want to ask you, right, Manuela, like how do you determine what is tradition? Because again, when we're talking tradition now, that term is so broad,
right,
where I'm wary of it, because I learned, say, the class of miniature painting, and the techniques that you're learning is in a parallel, like if you're learning how to sculpt with clay,
right,
or you're learning how to use another medium, photography even, or painting itself. So for me, learning the language goes hand in hand as a visual artist. Like you have to have a language that is going to allow you to express. And that's very important for me to share with students, because students think that there is some magic in, like, how can I learn this tradition and then, it's going to give me a way of being in the world as an artist. And that fetishization towards tradition, I think, needs to be demystified. That's how I see. Maybe now with age I can talk like this, but definitely this illusion of the tradition is an ongoing journey for me. This idea of like how you learn something in depth, how you, especially for me, learning more about book art or manuscript paintings, the vernacular that geographically has been in some Islamic countries, but it's not necessarily limited by religion. And this idea of that sort of genre, visual genre, which is outside of, say, a very standard Western canon, and understanding, the more I see it, the more I would start to understand it better. But so much of it exists in truncated fashion. It is in institutions, it's in storages, it comes up here and there in group shows around a certain theme. And so much of the art history discourse that has been written about it, or about broader frameworks like Islamic art, is inevitably reductive. Right. So it's not like being in Pakistan and Lahore and one had access to this whole idea of tradition. So that I think polarizes this idea about the tradition is the other, and the West, or coming to the West, now you're suddenly going to express you know, your own vision.
Right. So it's the tradition versus freedom, or
This type
the
of binary,
right.
I think it is very easy to create, because I've been subjected to it for many, many years. But I do want to be able to tell you guys that this binary is a problematic binary. At least that's how I see it.
So one of the and there's a question from the audience that I think is coming that is relevant to this from Rubens. The Russian poet Ilya Kaminsky says, translation, however faithful, is fiction. There are a lot of translations taking place in the work. If we're talking about tradition as something fixed, or is this a metaphor that is useful to you? So the way that he phrases it is, there are a lot of translations taking place in the work: Western feminism to a Southeastern condition, miniature to a large scale, linguistic translation to a visual translation. Are the visual arts the ultimate fictioner?
Absolutely, I think so. I think there's a lot of storytelling happening, and you know, the storytelling is so much linked to what we understand as history, and who gets to tell the story, who frames the story, who gets to have the sort of whose space is held in history, right? So in that sense, yes, visual artist plays a strong role, but you know, when as contemporary, all art is made in its own time, so it's always contemporary. And for me, when I look back at historical artworks, I do give them that same level of respect, that I need to understand what were the conditions, as well as I can imagine or do research that were instrumental in the creation of such work. So I think context becomes really important, and for me, I am interested in these in-between spaces.
Mm-hmm.
So the issue of translation is a very, as you pointed out, is a very pertinent and symbolic and relevant idea conceptually also, but it takes place in many ways. It takes place also in the idea of the transformation of material. So, you know, like how a sketch evolves into a painting, or how bronze, when I'm doing the patina on the bronze, how the nature of bronze can be made into something more like clay, or porous, or softer. So how material, like how can you play with the material? There is a moment of a transformation that occurs in the work. I think that something like that is very much parallel to the idea of translation too. You will gain something, but you will lose something, and that sort of dynamic of that kind of thrusts the work forward. There's an urgency that comes with that. For me, it's almost like fodder for the work, and
Right.
that's how I kind of think of the broader process, the creative process itself.
It's interesting. It sounds like there's an engagement with a particular grammar that then gets transformed and transfixed. It's the form versus function thing too, that we talk about with translation. But I also, one of the things that you wind up doing a lot too and discussing a lot is portraits. And so there have been several questions regarding portraits, and some of the recent ones that you've done of AOC, and in response to the movement for Black Lives. And Edward has just asked, what role do you think artists of color play in this movement, and how do you grapple with your anti-colonial art displayed in what be considered colonial spaces like the Whitney or the MoMA in Princeton?
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Like, I think very tough questions.
yeah, tough
Very
question.
relevant questions. I think in terms of you know, we're talking about art. We're talking about actually also art that it's the physical art, it's a visual art. It's so much of it is about the object itself. So much of it is already has how it exists to us is so much of through there's institutional play and structuring also. So, you know, I think as an artist, art is not, for me, art is not going to solve a lot of these problems, right? It can illuminate, it can point out, it can, I will say I can control what I can control in the process and the making of the work. But then once the work exits and is out in the public space, how that work is going to be received, what type of frameworks are going to be placed on that work are often more an outcome of the institutional systems out there. So yes, so definitely there is that paradox for sure in terms of, you know, how we think in terms of art, but also in terms of change. And I often, in the process of making the art, I am very much involved. You know, I want to keep the process as open, as sensitive, as the vulnerabilities are there, how I process larger themes and things that speak to me, finding ways to bring that sentiment into the work is something that I feel very empowered by, that gives the work a certain sense of direction. It propels it. I am and I'm always curious. So though, like, the theme of perhaps portraiture runs through the work, but it's not necessarily just one dimension of the work. For me, portraiture is not just necessarily the face, the portrait itself. Portraiture can be symbolically something completely different. Visually, it could really be represented in abstract ways, in the suggestion of history, in the suggestion of a locality, in the mapping of geography in a very cartographical manner. So like when I'm making, for example, Parallax, it's for me, it is a portrait of the Strait of Hormuz too. So you know, obviously as a visual artist, one can take a lot of liberty. One can take a lot of liberty even with the ways that an art historian will not. So I can play with far more subjectivity. And yeah, I'm not sure if that really answered your question, but if you want to ask me anything in addition to expand, I'd be very happy.
I think that's we will move on to one last question and then sort of formally dismiss and see if we can talk a little bit longer, but just so that we can also give people a sense of what is happening and when. But we have our last question. Thank you for that. And I think the engagement that you have with all of these various discourses makes it both endlessly rich and interesting, but we could talk forever about any of these particular subjects, right? The engagement with politics and different movements, language and tradition and innovation, so on. But this last question also has to do with technique. Lauren asks, several of us in attendance had a conversation today about drawing, about what defines a drawing versus a painting or sculpture or any other work of art. And what do you see as the role of drawing in your work? Is there a difference between drawing and sketching?
Yes, absolutely. I think of drawing as a libretto in my work. I think of drawing as a medium that is more immediate to me in terms of me as a thinker. So when I'm thinking, the immediacy of that thought and what I want to say happens much more fluidly when I'm sketching or actually trying to think the idea through is going to happen through drawing, which may not necessarily happen through me sitting down and writing it out in words. So I think of it in this primal way, that it is a tool to think through, a notational tool, a foundation tool where ideas can be pursued and determined and culled out and clarified, and then I can engage with drawing and other mediums. So drawing becomes almost like a kind of a negotiator or a collaborator in of itself. I can use the drawing to collaborate with music. I can use the drawing to collaborate with writing, and also drawing to create, to think in terms of space, velocity, scale, movement, kinetic ideas, how drawing can function in space itself. And I feel like drawing can transcend boundaries around culture, religion, culture, identity in a much more fluid way. But I also feel like so much of the work that I make is usually in the mediums that are associated with drawing. So when I think, oh, this is a painting, and somebody comes along and says, no, that's a drawing, I am like the first to say, no, that's not a drawing anymore, it's a painting. So again, I think because the works are on paper, often in a much more conventional, traditional way of understanding how to differentiate between painting and drawing, my small paintings were often considered drawings. And I would always be like, no, these are paintings. And it doesn't matter if they are on paper, but they are.
Yeah, this question of categories and being boxed in keeps coming up. And I think that's a good way to close formally this. Whoever wants to stay can stay with us for a little bit longer. But I want to thank our audience for being here with us, and Shahzia for coming and sharing her life and work, and our funders for providing the space where we can have academic discussions about Islam, and also open it up for all kinds of universal discussions about the human condition. So thank you very much, and we'll be on for a little bit longer for whoever wants to chat. And if we didn't get to your questions, I haven't forgotten, and I really appreciate that. I will find a way of getting to you at some point. Thank you. That was wonderful, and we can continue talking as at least until maybe 7:30. Is that if that's available? But I also wanted to open this to Amy and Tina.
I just wanted to thank you, Shahzia, for this wonderful, wonderful event. And I think we just give people, there are some people who are anxious to sort of get off to other things and wanted to know when it was ending. So I think we'll formally have ended it, but there are so many people who still seem to have questions and be interested in listening to another 10 minutes, 15 minutes, however long you're able to stay. So we'll see who stays on after the people who want to have signed off. But thanks to everyone for coming. Thank you to Manuela for putting on such a wonderful event for us. And Shahzia, you are our guest of honor. And thank you so much for making this such a fantastic event.
No, it was one of the most dazzling. It's so hard to keep up with you. It's that there's this sort of I was, as I said to you in writing, this casual mastery of a variety of languages, right? Not just the visual languages, but theoretical languages as well. And I think being able to discuss these things really also opens up the question of what is tradition, which is something you and I discussed earlier as well. I think there are some lingering questions, and I want to see if I can see them on the chat, or if you can. But here we go. Yes, if you can repost some of the questions, that would be great, because I can't necessarily see them, and I want to make sure that whoever we are addressing is still here. Okay. So I think one of the questions has to do with the idea of Islam as a violent religion, and I think you can read it too. It's your miniature, The Many Faces of Islam. So Jacob would like your specific take on this piece, and does art play a vital role in topping the distorted view of Islam as easily promoting or glorifying war and violence? If not, should art take up that responsibility?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
So as an artist, this is from Jacob. I am sure Ms. Sikander will agree visual expression can often rival oratory in expressing ideals cross-culturally. Does art play a vital role in toppling the distorted view of Islam as easily promoting or glorifying war and violence? If not, should art take up that responsibility?
You know, you can't control other art, like our artists. There are many artists that you know are going to see events from different vantage points, and also I think there is so much subjectivity in the work. So even if there is a artwork that is aesthetically engaging with violence, are they critiquing violence, or are they actually giving it, you know, a platform? So it's hard to give you a very clear picture or a clear answer. I think in terms for myself, I do think that the nature of how media represents Islam and in Muslims, as we know, we often, you know, hear it, and it's this very reduced way of representing, the reductive representation. Any representation in that way, when it's just removed from all nuance, is very problematic. And that is often something that is one of the threads in my work, is how I can add more nuance, more layers, more meaning, more interpretations, so that it's not just one way. And when I give that multiplicity, then I can critique a topic from multiple places also. So it's never like taking one position and then saying this is the only position of seeing something. So that's just sort of broad kind of way. But since you asked something very specific to the representation of Muslims, I think, for example, like just that particular work, Many Faces of Islam, at that time, I was really thinking the question was, as a visual artist that had been proposed to a group of visual artists, was how what they thought would be a defining moment in the new millennium. So the work was done in 97. Gosh. And or even 97 or 99, like it took me a while to make it, but it was 2 years before 9/11. And it was really, for me, it was like I was proposing that, you know, American foreign policy in many Muslim countries would be very much a topic that will occupy us in multiple ways. And with that broader premise, I was able to think of who are the players, you know, since say 1940s, like kind of all the upheavals that have happened in terms of a nation states, in terms of who's a friend and who's a foe, and how these dynamics keep changing and shifting. So in that sort of time frame, the shapeshifters, I was able to engage with them in the structure of a manuscript and portraiture, and playing with issues around war and censorship, and also American kind of foreign policy, and how that has how that creates a dynamic outside of the US. And often people that are Americans living in the US are not necessarily that engaged with what that means for the rest of the world often, and in many cases for the long history of how US foreign policy has played a role. And I think that is a very valid vantage point that I can offer, because I have lived outside, I have lived inside. This idea of having to see something from within and to see something from outside, and that what that type of what that position gives me. So sort of that is one way where I can counter very simplistic or stereotypical representations
of Islam. Yeah, and of all kinds of different things. It's so hard to make a soundbite out of your work. The fact that it resists representation already seems like it's a pushback. So no, and thank you, Jacob, for asking that. Let me see if I can keep up with where the questions are going, and we don't have all that much time, so we might not be able to engage. And for those of you who are my students, I absolutely, we will get to those in class, and I appreciate the way you're engaging with this now. Let's see, we had Lindsay Oakes. She would love to hear the story of the little girl, or your thoughts on children, particularly young girls, in light of feminism and patriarchy.
Yeah, so when I would say think of this space of the historical miniature, from majority of my understanding, and it's always been that it was a practice, again relegated to a very male domain.
Yeah.
I'm sure there must have been women practicing, but maybe they never entered history, or their stories never got seen, and in many cases, so much of the paintings are not necessarily, you don't even know who may have been the artist, right? But of course we do know, and it's definitely, it's a time frame where it's a male dominated space. So that was one way for me, was like, okay, what does it mean as a female to make miniature paintings, how to sort of be part of that tradition, and how to create a rupture. And then also the representation of the female within some of the paintings. Not all of them, but the ones that I was really perhaps looking at, the representation of the female figure as a often very standard static figure, and often awaiting an event that has yet to happen, or being, paralyzed, or sort of like the static image that I was reading as that, somebody who is not perhaps, who's much more complacent or is not proactive. So that would give me ideas that, okay, if I want to take this idea of this feminine representation, how can I be playful, and how can I create the protagonists that are engaged and connected to the past in more imaginative ways, in much more ways that speak to who I am, that are more intelligent, that are more engaged, that are more in control, yeah, and that premise would be, it would allow you a lot of creative freedom to not be tied to what the texts around the visuals would be calling upon, right? So if the text was incredibly descriptive about a certain painting, I would take a lot more freedom and say, I'm going to rearrange the hierarchies and the dynamics and read it in many, many different ways. And in that sense, it would open up the read of that particular historical work too. And that's one strategy.
It's an interesting thing. We didn't talk about that, but that's a fascinating way of doing this too. There's somebody who, in the same vein, also talking about gender hierarchies, has asked from the beginning if there is any advice that you have in order to engage with traditional art forms in the diaspora, specifically South Asian forms where the traditions are often taught in student mentor or master disciple formats, guru shishya formats.
So yeah, can you repeat it again? Like how?
Sorry. So what advice would you give to somebody who from the diaspora would like to engage with these traditional art forms, particularly understanding that you've got this this hierarchy, or this mentor, or this master disciple, or student mentor relationship?
Yeah, again, it's I think it's so much is shifting and changing. Let's see, the way what being in COVID and post-COVID world, what that's gonna unfold in terms of physical engagement, with outside of the diaspora, or, does it mean that you might have access in other ways? I think this idea of learning from somebody or somebody passing the knowledge, again, I think it's a wonderful, beautiful idea, and it's incredibly tactile and real. And in my
Right.
experience, I cannot like let that is a time that I did spend, um, 10, 14, sometimes 18 hours a day, kind of engaging with material. But I think you can do that too in terms of your own level of engagement and passion. So when if I'm doing research towards any project, you know, I I am as rigorous. I have to do all the reading.
I guess that is
Reach out
tradition, right?
to people. Yeah. So it's not necessarily just tied to to from what I understood, to a lack of accessibility in the diaspora. I would say that you have to find that mentor around you, because art, first of all, has to happen from its engagement with what is around it. Its sense of community is really, it's not in a vacuum. It's happening because you're part of something.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess if we've in a post-COVID world, tradition in the same way might not exist anymore, in quite the same format. And
Or it could, right? If
or yeah, could
have
be
been given, what if what this puts more pressure on institutions to digitize their archives and to make them even more readily available. I know many museums that have the means are doing that, but I was talking earlier to in our another talk that I would love to be able to access things in Istanbul. I would love,
yeah.
like you go to a museum in many museums in India, like so much of that data is not necessarily available on their website. So
Right.
so it's not just only what is available in the archives of the Met, but also in places that that one would assume that you have much more access to, but actually not
You don't.
necessarily.
Yeah.
As a
Something
Pakistani, was never
cataloged.
able to go to India to look at so much of the actual historical works. It was never possible. And so, so I would feel like maybe this way of how we are connecting now online and with it might open up and break down these sort of barriers and hierarchies.
Well, that's a wonderful, I think, horizon to end with. I see a couple of my students particularly dying to ask questions, but I'm going to save that for class. And there's a lot of engagement here, and I hope that we can completely or that we can continue these conversations and we can completely reimagine tradition together through different formats. Thank you so much for being here with us. And thank you all for staying the duration of this. It's been wonderful.
Fantastic. Those were fantastic questions. And I'm looking at them. Are they going to stay in the chat? They're great questions.
They really are. I'm very, I can copy them for you too. I've saved them.
They're very rigorous questions. And there was
so
some
well
that
done.
I
So well
didn't that we missed, and we didn't get a chance to them. But thank you to all the students. Really, I appreciate it a lot. And I know we're going to be engaging again in your class. So we'll have a chance to have more conversation.
Yeah, those the rough questions are coming. They're unforgiving, as I have learned, lovingly unforgiving, which is the best kind of engagement, I think, the one that I've learned from the most. So thank you very much.
And thanks to our colleagues and our Board of Visitors members and our students and everyone who's able to come and stay for the 2 hours that we've been here. So thank you all so much. And Amy, are you able to save the chat, or Manuela, did you say you had saved the
I
chat?
copied it, so I'm trying to copy and paste it.
It's 37 new messages.
Oh gosh. I just
So
keep
I'm
getting
like, I'm just amazed at the energy here. I love it. It's
Amy's going to save the chat within the webinar,
Okay,
the Zoom session. So
yes, definitely save it.
wonderful.
Thank you so much. Thank
you so
Tina.
much. And that you need to go back to as well.
Yes, thank you. I'll see you later, I hope. I'll certainly follow you and your work. So thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye, everybody. Good night.
Bye-bye. Good night.